The night I stopped being invisible was the same night I wished I could disappear completely. I remember the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, even though the air conditioning inside the Meridian Hotel ballroom was set low enough to make the crystal chandeliers seem to sweat. My fingers kept finding the hem of my dress, this navy blue thing I'd borrowed from my coworker Priya, because I didn't own anything appropriate for a private corporate gala in downtown Chicago. The fabric was slightly too long on me, and I'd already caught my heel on it twice crossing the lobby. Small disasters. The kind that felt enormous when you were already out of place. I was there because my boss, Raymond Holt, had gotten food poisoning the day before and handed me his invitation like it was a parking ticket he didn't want to deal with. "You'll represent the firm, Harper. Just smile and don't talk about the Kessler account." That was the entirety of his instruction. I was a mid-level contracts analyst at Aldridge & Park, 31 years old, and the most exciting thing I'd done in recent memory was reorganize the filing system in the third-floor archive room. This gala, hosted by some international investment group with a name I couldn't pronounce, was not my world. Every person in that room seemed to know it. I found a spot near the far end of the bar, ordered sparkling water because I needed to stay sharp, and tried to look like I belonged. The bartender, a young guy with nervous eyes, poured my drink and then immediately looked past me. I followed his gaze without thinking. That was my first mistake. There was a shift in the room. Not loud. Nothing as obvious as that. More like a pressure change, the way the air feels different seconds before a storm. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. People straightened. A cluster of men near the entrance parted without being asked, and through that quiet parting walked someone who made the entire ballroom reorganize itself around him without taking a single deliberate step. He was younger than I expected, given the way everyone reacted. Maybe early 30s. Dressed in black, jacket, vest, open-collar shirt, with tattoos climbing his neck in dark, intricate patterns that disappeared beneath the white fabric at his collar. His face was sharp and still, the kind of still that isn't peaceful but controlled. Like stillness was a choice he made every second, and never forgot to maintain. 2 men flanked him at a practiced distance, not touching him, not speaking, just existing in his orbit like satellites that knew their place. I looked away fast. Faster than I should have, probably, because the motion itself felt like I'd been caught doing something wrong. "You should be more careful," said a voice beside me. I turned. A woman about my age, dark hair pinned up, a glass of champagne in her hand, and an expression like she found everything slightly amusing. She nodded toward the man I'd just looked away from. "Staring at Donghyun Kang tends to have consequences," she said lightly, but there was something underneath the lightness, a warning dressed as small talk. "I wasn't staring," I said. She smiled without showing teeth. "Right." Then she drifted away into the crowd, and I was alone again with my sparkling water and the distinct feeling that I had wandered into a story I hadn't been given the first chapter of. Donghyun Kang. I turned the name over in my mind without meaning to. I spent the next hour doing exactly what Raymond had asked, smiling at the right moments, nodding through conversations I barely followed, exchanging business cards with people who would never call me. The event was a fundraiser of some kind, real estate development with a charitable component, the kind of thing that let wealthy people feel generous while staying comfortable. I was good at being background. I'd spent most of my professional life perfecting it. It was near 9 o'clock when I went looking for the restroom and took a wrong turn past a set of double doors that should have been closed. They weren't. I pushed through without thinking, found myself in a smaller corridor, carpeted, dimly lit, lined with framed photographs of Chicago's skyline at various decades, and realized almost immediately that I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I turned to go back. "The gala is that way." The voice came from behind me. Low, precise, carrying the faint trace of an accent worn smooth by years. I turned slowly, the way you move when you're not sure what you'll find. He was standing at the far end of the corridor, alone, which surprised me. No satellites, just Donghyun Kang, one hand resting loosely in his jacket pocket, watching me with an expression I couldn't read at all. His eyes were dark and careful. The kind of eyes that were always doing more work than his face admitted. I got lost, I said. Brilliant. I was looking for the restroom. It's back through the main hall, left of the stage. Thank you. I didn't move immediately, and I wasn't sure why. Maybe because he didn't seem concerned that I was there. Most people in his position, whatever that position was, would have had someone come remove me politely by now. He just stood there, watching, like he was deciding something and had all the time in the world. You're not with any of the firms, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm with Aldridge and Park. Contracts. Something moved across his face. Not quite interest. More like recognition of a category. You came alone. My boss sent me as a substitute. A pause. He tilted his head by almost nothing. And you came. I didn't have much of a choice. Everyone has a choice, he said. Quiet. Flat. Final. The way only people who have never truly been without options say things like that. I wanted to argue with him, which was insane, so I didn't. I just nodded once and said, I'll find my way back. Sorry for interrupting. You didn't interrupt anything. I believed him, which was the strangest part. He said it the way someone states a weather fact. No performance in it. No politeness for politeness' sake. Just the plain thing. I walked back to the main hall, heart doing something irregular in my chest, and told myself the whole encounter was nothing. A wrong turn. A few exchanged sentences with a stranger in a hotel corridor. Forgettable. But when I returned to the ballroom and scanned the room, habit, the way you check an environment when something feels off, I noticed one of his men was already positioned near the bar where I'd been standing earlier, not watching the room, watching the direction I'd come from. And then I noticed something else. Marcus Webb was there. My stomach dropped the way it does in dreams when the floor disappears. Marcus Webb, my ex-fiancé, the man I hadn't spoken to in 14 months. The man who had left me 2 weeks before our wedding for reasons he never fully explained, and I had never fully recovered from. He was across the room, older-looking somehow, tailored suit, laughing at something the person beside him said. He hadn't seen me yet. I set my water glass down on the nearest table, turned to find the exit, and walked directly into a server carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The crash was spectacular. Glass against marble, champagne in an arc, the tray hitting the floor with a sound that silenced the nearest third of the room. I stood in the middle of it, dress now splattered at the hem, face burning, the server apologizing even though I was entirely at fault, and every pair of eyes within 30 feet finding me at once, including Marcus's. Including, I felt it before I confirmed it, Donghyun Kang's, who had returned to the ballroom at some point and was now standing not far from the entrance, his two men close again, his gaze moving from the mess on the floor to me, with that same unreadable quiet. I wanted the marble to open up and take me down. Instead, I crouched down to help gather the broken glass, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. And the server kept saying, "Please don't, miss. Please don't." And Marcus was already moving through the crowd toward me with that expression I recognized. Pity wrapped in familiarity. And the whole night was unraveling in the worst possible direction. This is fine, I told myself. This is completely fine. It was not fine. Marcus reached me before I had fully straightened up. Harper. He said my name like he owned it still. Like 14 months of silence gave him no pause at all. Like we were old friends who'd simply lost touch rather than two people who had planned a life together and then watched it come apart at the seams. He even smiled. That easy, practiced smile that used to make me feel chosen and now just made me feel tired. Marcus. I kept my voice level. I was proud of that. I didn't know you'd be here. He glanced around, quick, the way people do when they're checking whether someone more important is watching. You look good. I didn't return the compliment. I'm here for work. Right. He nodded like that made perfect sense, like everything I did was reasonable and small and predictable. That had always been his way, making me feel managed without ever saying anything directly unkind. Who are you with now? Still at that contracts firm. That contracts firm. Like it was a minor detail. Like my career was a placeholder he'd never bothered to memorize properly. Aldridge and Park, yes, I said. Same place I was when you knew me. Something flickered in his expression. Not guilt exactly. More like mild discomfort, the way you feel when you step on uneven pavement. A brief adjustment, and then you move on. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. Stepping closer in that way that used to feel intimate and now felt presumptuous. I've been meaning to reach out. There are things I should have explained better. About why Marcus. I stopped him. My voice was quiet but firm, and it surprised me, the firmness of it. Not tonight. He blinked. I don't think he'd expected that. The old Harper would have listened. The old Harper would have found a quiet corner and given him the conversation he wanted on his terms, at his pace, because she was still hoping for an explanation that would make everything hurt less. That Harper had needed him to make sense of things. This Harper was standing in a hotel ballroom with champagne on her dress and approximately 0 patients left. I'm going to get some air, I said, and I moved past him before he could find the next thing to say. The terrace doors were at the back of the ballroom, and I slipped through them into the Chicago night. Late September, cool and sharp, the city spread out below the hotel's 14th floor like a circuit board lit from within. I gripped the railing and let the air hit my face, and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. I stayed there for a few minutes, long enough for the heat in my face to fade, long enough to feel something steadier returning beneath my ribs. The city helped. It always did. There was something about Chicago at night that made personal disasters feel appropriately small. All those millions of people moving through their own complicated evenings, completely indifferent to mine. I heard the terrace door open behind me. I didn't turn around immediately, assuming it was another gala guest stepping out for air. But the quality of the silence that followed was different from what I expected. Heavier, more deliberate. I turned. Donghyun was standing a few feet from the door, not approaching, not retreating. Just present. The city light caught the edge of his jaw, the dark lines of the tattoos at his collar. He had a glass of something amber in his hand, barely touched. The corridor earlier, now the terrace, he said. You make a habit of finding places you're not supposed to be. Or, I said, the places I find just happen to already be occupied. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, restrained before it could fully form. He stepped up to the railing, leaving a careful distance between us, and looked out at the city. I watched him for a second. The ease of his posture, the way he held that glass, everything unhurried. And then I looked back at the skyline too, because looking at him for too long felt like standing too close to something with significant gravitational pull. The man inside, he said. Not a question. He upset you. My jaw tightened. He's no one. He's not no one. Still that same flat certainty. He was someone. That's different. I didn't answer immediately. There was something disarming about the precision of it, the way he cut through the polite lie without being unkind about it. We were engaged, I said finally. I don't know why I told him. Maybe because he'd already said the true thing, and lying after that felt pointless. A long time ago, he ended it. Donghyun was quiet for a moment. The city hummed below us. "And tonight, he wants to explain himself," he said. "Tonight, he wants to feel better about it," I corrected. "There's a difference." This time the pause before he responded was longer. When I glanced over, he was still looking at the skyline, but something in his profile had shifted. A slight tension at the jaw, something that came and went too quickly to name. "You're perceptive," he said. 14 months of thinking about it," I said, and then felt immediately embarrassed by how honest that was. I looked back at the railing. I should go back in. I still have to find at least 2 people to give business cards to before I can leave. I pushed off from the railing and started for the door, and that was when it opened from inside. Marcus. Of course. With that expression, the one that mixed concern with ownership, that particular blend only ex-fiancé who felt they'd left things unfinished could produce. His eyes moved from me to Donghyun, and then back to me, and the calculation in his face was immediate and unpleasant. "Harper, I just wanted to..." He stepped forward, reaching for my arm. She said not tonight. The voice was quiet. Absolutely quiet. No raised volume, no performance of authority. Just 4 words from Donghyun, spoken from where he stood at the railing like he was commenting on the weather. Marcus stopped. Not because of the words themselves. I don't think he even fully processed them at first. He stopped because of the 2 men who had appeared in the terrace doorway behind him without any sound at all, standing there with the particular stillness of people who are paid to make stillness feel dangerous. The color shifted slightly in Marcus's face. "I was just talking to her," he said. Thinner voice now. The easy confidence stripped back by a layer. "I know," Donghyun said. He set his glass down on the railing ledge slowly, like someone with no reason to hurry anything. "You were also done." Marcus looked at me. Something between accusation and confusion, like I had arranged this, like I had somehow produced this moment to humiliate him. I hadn't arranged anything. I was standing between 2 versions of a night I hadn't chosen, feeling the ground of the situation tilt entirely. Marcus left. No argument, no parting words. Just a recalibration of his dignity as he slipped back through the door. And then he was gone, and the 2 men in the doorway withdrew like shadows when a light shifts. The terrace was quiet again. I turned to Donghyun slowly. My heart was doing that irregular thing again, louder than before. "You didn't have to do that." He picked his glass back up, looked at it rather than me. "I know. I had it handled. I know that too. I waited for more, but more didn't come." He was infuriatingly economical with words, like each one cost something he was careful about spending. "Then why?" I asked. He finally looked at me. Direct, not aggressive, but complete, the way very few people actually look at another person. Like he was seeing the whole of me rather than the parts people usually notice first. "Because he was going to touch your arm," he said, "and you didn't want him to." I opened my mouth, closed it, because he was right, and the rightness of it, the fact that he had seen that, had read it from across a terrace before I'd even fully registered it myself, did something strange to my composure. "I don't know you," I said, carefully. "No," he agreed. "So, why do you care where he puts his hands?" The question sat between us in the cool air. He didn't answer immediately, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer at all. That he would simply let the silence be the response, as he seemed entirely capable of doing. But then he said quietly, "I don't have a good answer for that." And somehow that honesty, raw and unpolished, so unlike everything else about him, was the most unsettling thing he'd said all night. I went back inside. I found my 2 contacts, distributed my business cards, and left the Meridian Hotel by 10:30. In the cab home, I stared at the city lights blurring past the window and told myself the evening had been strange, but it was over. I believed it until the next morning, when the receptionist at Aldridge and Park called up to my desk to say that someone had sent flowers. No card. Just an arrangement of white peonies in a black vase, sitting at the front desk with my name on the envelope, and nothing inside it. Nothing except a single word, written in clean, deliberate handwriting. Safe. I left the peonies at the front desk for 2 days before bringing them up to my office. I told myself it was because I didn't want to encourage whatever that was. Then I told myself it was because white flowers on a black vase looked better in the lobby than in my cluttered workspace. Both of those things were partially true and mostly dishonest, and I knew it, which is perhaps why I spent those 2 days glancing toward the elevator every time it opened, as if expecting someone who had no reason to appear in a mid-level contracts firm on the 22nd floor of a building on South Wacker Drive. No one appeared. The week moved the way weeks do when you're trying not to think about something, slowly and full of reminders. On Thursday, Raymond returned from his food poisoning with the energy of a man who had survived something significant and wanted credit for it. He dropped a file on my desk at 9 a.m. and said, "Good news, Harper. The investment group from the gala wants to retain us for a series of commercial property contracts. Big portfolio. International holdings. They asked specifically for someone detail-oriented." He paused at my door. "I told them you'd be the lead analyst." I looked up from my coffee. "They asked for me by name." Raymond looked mildly uncomfortable. "They asked for whoever represented us at the gala." He straightened his jacket. "Which was you. So, effectively, yes." I spent the rest of that morning staring at the file without reading it. The investment group's name was listed at the top of the intake form, KH Capital Group, Chicago and New York offices. Below it, in the authorized representative line, a name I already knew, Donghyun Kong. I could have gone to Raymond and asked to be reassigned. I thought about it seriously, sitting there with my coffee going cold and the morning traffic audible through the glass. I could have said I had a conflict of interest, which wouldn't have been technically accurate, but would have been emotionally honest. I could have created distance the way sensible people create distance from things that make their pulse do unreliable things. Instead, I opened the file and started reading, because I was a professional, and the work was the work, and because somewhere underneath the sensible reasoning was a quieter, more inconvenient truth. I wanted to understand what safe meant. The first meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at KH Capital's Chicago office in the West Loop. I arrived 7 minutes early, which was how I arrived everywhere, and was shown to a conference room on the 15th floor by a woman who moved with the specific efficiency of someone paid to be invisible. The room was all glass and clean lines, a long table with 8 chairs, a view of the city that cost more than my annual salary to occupy. I set my materials out carefully and waited. 3 men arrived first. Legal representatives, introductions exchanged briskly, then 2 more from KH's internal team, quiet and watchful in a way that I was beginning to recognize as a particular professional signature of the people around Donghyun. He arrived last. Not late, precisely on time, which somehow felt like its own form of control. He came in without announcement, took the chair at the head of the table, and the room organized itself. That was the only way to describe it. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Postures adjusted. Even the men who'd arrived first seemed to recalibrate simply by his presence entering the space. He looked at me once when he sat down, brief, acknowledging. Then he looked at the file in front of him, and the meeting began. I was good at my job. Whatever else was complicated about that room, the work itself was familiar ground, and I held my footing on it. I walked through the contract framework clearly, flagged 3 areas that needed restructuring, asked precise questions about the timeline on the New York properties. The KH legal team responded, discussed among themselves, deferred twice to Donghyun, who answered in short sentences that closed arguments efficiently. He didn't address me directly for the first 40 minutes. Then one of his lawyers said something about indemnity clauses that wasn't quite accurate, and before I could stop myself, I said, That's not what the Illinois statute provides for. The liability window is narrower than that. It'd expose the holding company. I pulled the relevant page from my folder and slid it across the table. Here. Silence. The lawyer looked at the page, looked at his colleague. Both of them looked at Donghyun. Donghyun looked at me. You're correct, he said. Simply, no performance of being impressed. No condescension in the acknowledgement. Just the plain fact, stated as such. We'll revise that section, his lawyer said quickly. The meeting ended an hour later. People gathered their things. Conversations resumed at the door. The room began to empty in the gradual way conference rooms do. I was sliding documents back into my folder when I realized everyone else had left, and Donghyun was still seated, watching me with that particular quality of attention, the kind that didn't announce itself, but was impossible to ignore once noticed. You prepared thoroughly, he said. It's my job, I said, not dismissive, just true. The statute reference. You had the page number ready. I read the file 3 times. I closed my folder. I usually do. A pause. He leaned back in his chair slightly, one hand resting on the table, and studied me with something that wasn't quite analysis and wasn't quite anything I had a clean name for. The flowers, I said, because I had decided in the cab over that I would say it if given the opportunity. The peonies. Yes. Safe is not an explanation. No, he agreed. It isn't. Then what was it? He was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room glass, the office moved, people crossing between desks, phones, the low hum of a functioning organization. In here, the silence between us felt insulated from all of that. A statement, he said finally. Of what? He looked at me directly. That same complete look from the terrace, the one that took in more than its share. That you were, after that night, safe. He was saying I had been safe. Under what exactly, I didn't ask, because the answer existed in the particular way his 2 men had appeared at that terrace door without being called, and in the way Marcus had left without a single word of protest, and in the word itself, written, sent, offered without expectation of anything in return. I didn't know what to do with that. So I thanked him for the meeting, said my firm would have the revised framework to his team within 5 business days, and left. In the elevator down, I pressed my back against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. Over the next 2 weeks, the contract work created a rhythm of contact. Emails between my desk and his legal team. 2 follow-up calls where I spoke to his representatives and not to him. Then a second in-person review where he sat across the table again, and we spent 90 minutes going through the New York property addendum line by line. And somewhere in the middle of that process, I stopped feeling the strangeness of his presence and started simply working alongside it. Which was, I realized later, probably more dangerous than the strangeness had been. It was during the 3rd week, on a Tuesday evening when I had stayed late at the office, that one of the building's security guards came up to my floor looking faintly uneasy. He told me that a man downstairs was asking for me, not by my firm, by my name specifically, and that he hadn't come through the main visitor log. I went down to the lobby. Marcus was standing near the revolving door, coat damp from the rain that had started outside, and the expression on his face was the one I recognized as his version of sincerity. Effortful, slightly self-conscious, meant to be disarming. I need 5 minutes, he said. Every reasonable part of me said to say no, and yet I found a quiet corner of the lobby, 2 chairs near a window that overlooked the rain-slicked street, and I sat down because 14 months was a long time, and maybe I did want to hear it. Maybe I wanted that closure I'd been telling myself I didn't need. He talked. He explained that he'd panicked before the wedding, that he'd been afraid, that he had convinced himself he wasn't ready, and that it wasn't fair to me to stay if he felt that way. He said he knew now that walking away had been wrong. He said he'd been thinking about me since the gala. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Marcus, I spent a year waiting for this conversation, and now that I'm having it, I realize it doesn't change anything." He leaned forward. "Harper." The lobby door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know. The shift in the room, even a corporate lobby at 8:30 in the evening with only a security guard and 2 people in the corner, happened the way it always happened. The guard sat up straighter. The ambient sound reorganized. I turned. Donghyun stood inside the entrance, coat dry because one of his men held an umbrella behind him that I noticed only secondarily. His eyes moved across the lobby and found me with an efficiency that suggested he had known exactly where I was before the door opened. His gaze went to Marcus, then back to me. Something in his jaw set. He crossed the lobby without hurrying and stopped near our chairs and looked at Marcus with an expression that was perfectly calm and contained absolutely nothing warm. "Miss Harper," he said, and the name in his mouth was a different shape than it was in anyone else's. "We have a matter to discuss. The New York addendum." Marcus looked up at him. The recognition was slow, the gala, the terrace, and when it landed, I watched the confidence leave his posture the way air leaves a room when a window is opened in winter. "At 8:30, I said to Donghyun. "The Tokyo office has a time difference," he said, and then looked at Marcus with that same quiet that needed no volume to fill a space. "We'll need the room." It wasn't a request. Marcus stood. He looked at me once, something unfinished in it, something he was recalculating, and then he said he'd be in touch, which we both understood to mean he wouldn't, and he walked out through the revolving door into the rain. Donghyun watched him go. Then he looked back at me, and for just a moment, one unguarded second, I thought I saw something cross his face that wasn't calculation. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like relief. "There is no Tokyo call," I said. "No," he said. "You followed me here." A pause. Honest. The way he'd been honest on the terrace. "I had you followed. There's a difference." The fact that he said it plainly, not defensively, not apologetically, was somehow more startling than if he'd denied it. "That's not acceptable," I said. "I know." He held my gaze. "You should go home, Harper. It's late." He said my name, and it did the same thing it had done a moment ago. Settled into the air differently, more weight to it than names usually carried. I picked up my bag. I walked to the elevator without looking back at him. But in the elevator, rising back to the 22nd floor to collect my things, I pressed my hand flat against the cool metal wall and stood very still, and thought about the word "followed," and what it meant that it hadn't frightened me the way it should have. That was the part that kept me awake that night. I should have asked to be taken off the account. I know that now, and I think I knew it then. Sitting at my kitchen table the next morning with coffee I kept forgetting to drink, watching the rain streak down the window of my apartment in Lincoln Park, while the city moved through its Wednesday without me. I had a clear case for conflict of interest. Not the legal kind, nothing that would hold up in a formal review, but the human kind. The kind where you recognize that your judgment about a professional situation has become compromised by something you haven't fully named yet. I didn't ask to be reassigned. Instead, I went to work, reviewed the New York addendum for the 4th time, and sent a clean revised draft to KH Capital's legal team by noon. Professional, precise. I kept the email formal and brief, addressed to the lead attorney. No reason for Donghyun to be directly involved in the correspondence. I was managing the situation. That was what I told myself. His response came at 2 in the afternoon, not through his lawyer. Directly, from his own email address. One I hadn't had before and hadn't asked for. The message was 4 sentences. He said the revised draft addressed all outstanding concerns. He said the timeline for signing was 2 weeks. He said he appreciated the attention to detail. Then, in a sentence that existed apart from the professional ones, separated by a line break as if he'd considered removing it and decided not to. You looked tired this morning when you arrived. Get lunch before the afternoon. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, went to the small sandwich place on the ground floor of the building, and ate lunch. I was not going to examine why I did that. The following Friday, Raymond called me into his office and told me that KH Capital had requested that I be present at a private dinner the next evening. A relationship-building event, he said, the kind that large investment groups hosted when they wanted to assess whether their legal partnerships were worth extending. It's at 16, the restaurant in the Trump Tower, he said, like the location itself was an argument. It's important for the firm. You'll go? It wasn't really a question. I said yes. I spent Saturday in a state of careful, deliberate calm. I found a dress I actually owned this time. Deep burgundy, simple, appropriate. I arrived at the restaurant at 7, was shown to a private dining room on the upper floor, and found a table of 10 already partially filled with people I recognized from the contract meetings, attorneys, financial advisors, 2 men from KHE's internal team who nodded at me with the economy of people who recognized my face but hadn't fully cataloged my name. Donghyun arrived at 7:15. Same quality of entrance as always. The room adjusted, conversations recalibrated, the staff moved differently around him. He wore charcoal tonight rather than black, and the tattoos at his collar disappeared into a shirt buttoned 1 notch higher than at the gala, which was the only concession to formality that seemed to have been made. He sat at the head of the table. I was 3 seats to his left, between one of his lawyers and a financial director named Paul, who talked about real estate markets with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loved real estate markets. I listened to Paul. I contributed to the conversation at appropriate intervals. I did not look at the head of the table more than was professionally reasonable. 3 times during dinner, I felt the weight of being looked at from that direction. Each time I didn't turn immediately. Each time when I finally did glance toward the head of the table because the conversation required it, Donghyun's attention was already somewhere else, or appeared to be. Dessert arrived, and the table conversation loosened the way it does when enough wine has been poured and the formal business of the evening feels sufficiently concluded. Paul excused himself. The lawyer on my other side was drawn into a discussion at the far end of the table. And without any particular engineering of the moment, I found myself in a quiet pocket of the evening, with an empty chair between me and the head of the table, where Donghyun sat with his water glass. He hadn't touched wine all evening, and his quiet that took up exactly as much space as everything else in the room combined. The addendum, he said, low enough that only I would hear. Signed off on by your team, I said. I know. I meant... He paused, rearranged something in his approach. You caught 4 issues the first legal team missed. 3, I said. The 4th was a formatting inconsistency, not a substantive error. Something settled in his expression. Not quite amusement, but adjacent. 3 issues, he conceded. Your original attorneys are very good, I said. The Illinois statute catch was a narrow thing. Most analysts would have let it pass. But you didn't. No. Why not? I looked at him. The question felt like it was about more than the statute. Because letting things pass tends to cost more later, I said. The table moved around us. Voices, laughter, the soft percussion of silverware and glasses. Inside the small quiet we'd built, Donghyun looked at me with that complete attention and said nothing for a moment. Harper. My name again. That weight again. What he said to you that night in the lobby. Did it matter? Marcus. He was asking about Marcus directly, which was so unlike his usual oblique approach that it caught me off guard. It mattered less than I expected it to, I said honestly. That surprised me. Why did it surprise you? because I spent a long time thinking it would matter enormously. I turned my water glass slowly on the tablecloth. I thought I needed the explanation to move forward. Turns out I'd already moved forward. I just hadn't noticed. He was quiet. Then, when did you notice? The question arrived gently, but it landed somewhere precise. I looked at him and thought about answering carefully, about wrapping it in professional distance, or deflecting with something vague. I thought about all the sensible reasons to maintain the clean line between this table and the one in the conference room on the 15th floor. Recently, I said. His jaw moved slightly. Not tension, something different. The word for it was closer to restraint. Like he was holding something back with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, but this time the effort of it was just barely visible. Paul returned from the restroom and reclaimed his chair and started a new sentence about cap rates in the River North corridor, and the moment folded closed like a book between pages, and I was grateful and also not grateful at all. The dinner ended at 10. Coats were retrieved, goodbyes exchanged, the private room released us back into the restaurant's public spaces, and then into the lobby. I said my professional farewells to the attorneys, confirmed a call for the following Wednesday, and was pulling up a rideshare app when I realized Donghyun had not moved toward the exit. He was standing near the lobby, his 2 men at their practice distance watching me. I crossed to him because walking past without acknowledgement felt dishonest after the dinner we just had. "Thank you for the invitation," I said. "It was a professional dinner," he said. "I know what it was." A pause. He glanced at my phone, the rideshare app open on the screen. "Where do you live?" "Lincoln Park." He looked at one of his men. The man spoke quietly into a phone. Donghyun looked back at me. "My driver will take you," he said. "That's not necessary. It's late. It's raining again." He said it without inflection, practical. The way he might note that a contract clause was inadequate, not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who had already decided what the resolution was. Donghyun. His name in my mouth for the first time. I watched something change in his face when I said it. Barely, but there. "I'm capable of getting myself home." "I know you are," he said. "That's not why I'm offering." The rain was audible through the lobby doors. His driver was already pulling up, a dark SUV visible through the glass. "Then why?" I asked. The same question I'd asked on the terrace, the one he hadn't been able to answer cleanly. He looked at me with those dark, careful eyes and said, quietly enough that the words felt private even in a public lobby. "Because from the moment you walked into that gala and knocked over an entire tray of champagne glasses, I have not been able to stop being aware of where you are." The lobby was quiet around us. His men were looking elsewhere with the professional discretion of people paid to have selective attention. I stood very still. The confession was so plainly stated. No decoration, no strategic framing, just the simple admission of a fact he'd apparently decided to stop withholding. That I didn't know how to deflect it. My usual tools weren't built for this. "That should concern me more than it does," I said finally. "I know," he said, and then quietly, "Get in the car, Harper. Let me do this one thing." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at the rain beyond the glass doors. Then I made a decision that was either very reasonable or not reasonable at all, and I walked through the lobby doors to the waiting car. He didn't follow me in. The driver took me home alone, professionally, without conversation. When I reached my apartment building and stepped out onto the wet sidewalk, I looked back at the car. On the seat beside where I'd been sitting, someone had placed a small folded card. I picked it up, his handwriting again, the same clean, deliberate strokes as before. "You said my name. 3 words. Nothing else." I stood on the sidewalk in the rain with the card in my hand and felt something I had been carefully avoiding, feeling settle fully into my chest. warm and complicated and absolutely inconvenient. I went upstairs. I set the card on my kitchen table next to the coffee I'd forgotten that morning. I sat down and looked at it for a long time. The city hummed outside my window. Chicago at midnight, indifferent and alive. I picked up my phone, opened his email, typed 3 words into a new message, held my finger over send for 4 full seconds. Then I pressed it. I noticed that. I set the phone face down on the table and did not look at it again that night, but I didn't sleep either. And somewhere in the middle of all that wakefulness, I understood that whatever careful distance I'd been maintaining had not been distance at all. It had been the space between 2 people trying to decide if the step forward was worth what it would cost. And I had just taken it. 3 days passed before I saw him again. They were not easy days. I worked. I answered emails, reviewed documents, sat through an internal meeting about quarterly billing targets that lasted 45 minutes longer than it needed to. I did all the ordinary things that ordinary days require, and underneath all of it ran a current I couldn't switch off. The awareness that I had sent 3 words into the dark and received nothing back. No reply to the email. No card. No flowers. No message through his legal team with a line break at the bottom that existed apart from the professional ones. Nothing. I told myself I wasn't waiting. I told myself the silence was information. Useful, clarifying, the kind that saves you from a longer mistake. I had years of practice at talking myself into steadiness, and I used all of it across those 3 days. And by Wednesday morning, I had almost convinced myself that the email had been a momentary lapse, and the silence was a kindness. And the whole sequence of events, from the gala to the rainy lobby, to the card on the seat of the car, had been an extended lesson in the dangers of proximity to people who occupied a world entirely unlike mine. Then Raymond appeared at my office door at 11 o'clock and said, KH Capital moved the Wednesday call to an in-person, their office this afternoon at 4. He hesitated. Kang will be there personally. He asked for you specifically. I looked at my monitor. Fine, I said. I'll be ready. I was ready. I arrived at the West Loop office at 3:55, was shown to the same conference room on the 15th floor, and set out my materials the way I always did. The legal team arrived. The internal staff arrived. The room filled with the practiced efficiency I had come to recognize as the particular atmosphere Donghyun generated around himself before he was even present. He came in at 4 exactly. He looked at me when he entered. Not the brief professional acknowledgement of the earlier meetings. A real look. Direct, unhurried. The kind that said the 3 days had cost him something too. Then he sat down and opened his folder, and the meeting began. We worked through 2 outstanding contract points. A dispute about liability coverage on the New York holdings. A question about transferability clauses in the Illinois portfolio. I was sharp. He was sharper. His legal team was good, but he was better than all of them. And watching him dismantle a flawed argument with 4 quiet sentences felt like watching someone practice a craft they'd been born into. The meeting ended at 5:40. The room emptied faster than usual. His team, I noticed, moved toward the door with slightly more purpose than the situation seemed to require, as if they had been given an instruction I hadn't heard. And then the room was empty except for us. He didn't pretend to be reviewing documents. He closed his folder and looked at me across the table and said, I didn't reply. I noticed, I said. I needed to think. For 3 days. Yes. No apology in it, no performance of regret, just the honest accounting of what had happened. What you said, what you sent. I wanted to be certain about what I said back. I don't do things carelessly. I folded my hands on the table. And are you certain now? He stood. Came around the table, not quickly, never quickly, every movement considered, and stopped at the chair beside mine, not sitting in it, just standing close enough that the careful professional distance we had maintained across multiple meetings and 1 private dinner was simply gone. The tattoos at his collar, the dark, precise eyes, the quality of stillness that had rearranged rooms since the first night I saw him. "What I am," he said, "is aware that you are the most clear-minded person I have encountered in a very long time. And that clarity costs me something. It makes things I have kept very controlled feel considerably less controlled." I looked up at him. "That doesn't sound like certainty." "It's the most honest thing I can offer you," he said, "and I need you to understand what that means. What my life is, Harper. I don't have a clean world to bring someone into. The men outside that door, the way things work around me, the weight of what I manage, none of that disappears." "I know what you are," I said quietly. "I'm not naive." "I know you're not." He crouched slightly to be level with me, the way someone does when they want to be sure they're being heard properly. "That's exactly why I'm telling you. Not because I think it will push you away, because you deserve to choose with full information." The city was orange and gray outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago in the early evening, all that amber light. "You had me followed," I said. "Yes." "You intervened with Marcus twice without being asked." "Yes." "You sent flowers with a single word and a card with 3 words and apparently had your entire team clear a conference room so we could have this conversation." The corner of his mouth moved. "The last one, yes." "That's a considerable amount of management for someone who values control," I said. "You are the only thing in recent memory I have not been able to manage," he said, plainly, like it was a fact he'd examined from every angle and arrived at after serious consideration. "I find that I don't want to." I was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city held its breath the way it never actually does, but always seems to in the moments that matter. "What would this look like?" I asked, realistically, given everything. "Different from what you're used to," he said. "There would be security. There would be things I couldn't always explain. There would be moments where I ask you to trust me before I can give you the reason." He paused. "And there would be me. Fully. Without the parts I keep from most people." That's a significant ask. I know. I looked at him for a long time. Donghyun, who had rearranged a ballroom without moving, who had sent away Marcus Webb with 4 words and no raised voice, who had followed me and admitted it plainly, who had written "safe" and "you said my name," and who was now crouched beside a conference room chair, asking me to choose with full information. Who was powerful in ways that unsettled rooms, and quiet in ways that unsettled me far more. "I'm going to need you to stop having me followed," I said. "Done. And if I call you, you answer. You don't communicate exclusively through lawyers and handwritten cards. Done. And the next time Marcus Webb or anyone else reaches for my arm in a lobby, you let me handle it." A pause. This one cost him something visible. "I'll try," he said. "Donghyun." "I will try," he said again. And the honesty in it, the acknowledgement that this was genuinely difficult for him, that the protective instinct was not performance, but something structural to who he was, landed more convincingly than an easy promise would have. I stood up. We were close now, standing, the conference table behind me and the orange evening light coming through the glass, and he was looking at me with an expression that had nothing controlled about it anymore. For the first time since the gala, I could see the full weight of what he'd been holding back, and it was more than I'd expected. More personal, more unguarded. "Okay," I said. He was still. "Okay. But I want to be clear." I held his gaze. "I'm not something to be managed or protected into a corner. I chose this job. I chose this city. I chose to stay when things were hard. I'll choose this too, if I choose it. But it has to be a choice. Mine. Every time." Something shifted in his face. Not concession, but recognition. Like I had named something he had hoped was true and was relieved to have confirmed. Every time, he agreed. He reached out then, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything, and took my hand. Not dramatically. Just his hand covering mine, steady and warm, with the simple certainty of someone who had made a decision and intended to honor it. We stood there in the empty conference room while Chicago turned gold outside the windows. The contracts were signed 3 weeks later. Both portfolios, Illinois and New York, clean and complete. Raymond called it the best work our firm had done in 5 years and took partial credit for it at the quarterly partners meeting, which I found I didn't mind at all. Marcus sent one text, 2 weeks after the lobby. I read it, put my phone down, and never replied. Not out of bitterness, out of the simple recognition that some doors close not with a dramatic slam, but with the quiet click of a person finally walking away from them on their own terms. Donghyun's world was not simple. I learned that over months, the security that became familiar, the conversations that stopped when I entered rooms and resumed with different words, the weight he carried that occasionally made him silent in ways I learned to sit beside without filling. There were things he managed that I wasn't meant to know in detail, and I kept the line there, respected it, asked the questions I needed to ask, and released the ones that weren't mine to hold. What I hadn't expected was the steadiness of him, the way he answered when I called, the way he learned what I needed. Space. Honesty. To be treated like a person with full agency, and gave it without being asked twice. The way he looked at me across ordinary rooms, restaurants, the kitchen of his apartment on a Sunday morning when neither of us had anywhere to be, with that same complete attention that had first caught me off guard in a hotel corridor on a night I was supposed to be invisible. He never stopped being the man who rearranged rooms by walking into them, but with me, slowly, he learned to simply be in them. 6 months after the gala, on a cold February evening in Lincoln Park, we were walking back from dinner, just the two of us, his security at a discreet distance ahead and behind, the kind of arrangement I had made my peace with, when he stopped on the sidewalk without warning. I turned. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, quieter than his usual quiet. Something underneath it that was working its way to the surface with the careful effort of a person who doesn't show things easily. "What?" I said. He reached into his coat pocket, brought out a small box, dark, simple, unannounced. No setup, no orchestrated moment. Just a sidewalk in February and the two of us and his eyes holding mine. "I told you I don't do things carelessly," he said. I looked at the box, back at him. My heart was doing that irregular thing, the one that had started the night I met him and never entirely stopped. "Donghyun, you don't have to answer now," he said. "But I needed you to know what I want, with full information, the way you asked for." I opened the box. A ring, not extravagant, not the kind that announces itself. Elegant, considered, exactly the kind of thing chosen by someone who had paid attention. I looked at it for a long time. The cold air, the city sounds, his steady presence beside me, asking for nothing except honesty. "I don't need time," I said. He was very still. "Yes," I said, simply, the way true things are said. "Yes." He took the ring from the box and placed it on my hand with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. Slow, certain, like a decision he had made so completely that the execution of it was only a formality. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since the night I had wandered into a hotel corridor and found him already there, Donghyun Kang smiled. Fully. Nothing held back. It changed his face entirely, made him look younger and warmer, and completely himself in a way I understood then that very few people ever got to see. I held his gaze and felt the cold and the city and the long way from that ballroom to this sidewalk. And I thought that the strangest, truest things in life arrive not when you're looking for them, but when you've taken a wrong turn and stumbled into a corridor you weren't supposed to find, and stayed anyway.